In April of 1995, a man by the name of MacArthur Wheeler went on the most audacious crime spree in the city of Philadelphia that perhaps we have ever seen. Not audacious because of the amount of money that he stole, not audacious because of the amount of violence that was perpetrated, but audacious because MacArthur Wheeler robbed 2 banks in the city without bothering to disguise himself or mask his face. Openly walked into 2 banks, robbed them, and didn't try to disguise himself at all. And so it is perhaps no surprise then that he was caught on security cameras committing his crimes, and his face was plastered all over the evening news that day. And it's probably no surprise that within hours of his face appearing on the evening news, MacArthur Wheeler was arrested for his robberies. It was a quick turnaround for the police. Nobody was surprised by this, except for MacArthur Wheeler, who muttered as he was being led away in handcuffs, "I don't understand, I used the juice." See, MacArthur Wheeler, having read an article about the invisible ink properties of lemon juice, had decided that if he had covered his face with it, he would be invisible to the security cameras in the banks. He was mistaken. But he could not be convinced of this. He could not wrap his head around what had gone wrong with his clever plan. 2 research psychologists at Cornell University, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, read about this story and came up with a hypothesis that they then began to test with students at the university and in other locations, and developed a theory what is now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you are a denizen of the internet and you read a lot of chat rooms, you've probably heard this phrase tossed about before. The Dunning-Kruger effect postulates that incompetent people are so incompetent that they do not have the competency to understand how incompetent they are. The corollary to this is that competent people are so convinced that the skills they have are very easy to learn that they cannot grasp how anyone else can't do the things they do. In both cases, we become centered on our own egos, on the love we have for our own ideas and opinions. We have our opinions, we have our ideas, and because they sprang fully formed from our heads and we know ourselves best, they are obviously right or close to right or at least damn near correct, and we have a hard time taking in any information and synthesizing any information that might convince us of something different or get us to change our opinion or get us to hold on to a new fact that might change our worldview. Humans being human, we are very proud of the products of our own minds and souls. And in and of itself, that's not a bad thing. I mean, as a whole, we're a brilliant, creative, resourceful species, and we come up with a lot of cool stuff. We have a lot to be proud of. But sometimes we take that pride just a little bit too far, and we hold on to our opinions and our ideas just a little too tightly. And when new information comes our way, or new experiences, or somebody else has a different experience from what we have, we shove it away. We crouch into a defensive posture so that we don't have to take in new information. We defend the product of our own souls. Julia Galef, who is the co-founder of the Center for Applied Rationality and hosts the podcast Rationally Speaking, refers to this practice as the soldier mindset. We are immediately on the defensive when something outside of our experience or outside of the idea we have crafted on our own creeps up on us. We have to defend our fragile egos. Now, there are times when this soldier mindset is absolutely necessary. There are times when our deepest, most cherished beliefs feel like they are coming under attack in the world. Certainly, right now, we are living in a time where our values feel like they're maybe under attack, and the soldier mindset seems to be necessary. We have to defend what we believe. We have to defend what we know to be true and right in the world against those who would try to diminish us, say that we are less than, say that love and equality and justice are pie-in-the-sky ideals that we shouldn't be holding on to. We want to defend ourselves. But when we get into the soldier mindset, it's very hard to step away from that. We want to defend every idea we have. We want to defend every experience we have. And we get carried away with that soldier mindset. If I, as a man, have never experienced any sort of sexism or misogyny, for example, I might be tempted to posit the opinion that misogyny and sexism are not problems in my experience. And if I'm having a conversation with a woman who has experienced those very things, if I'm in the soldier mindset, I'm not open to a little more truth, to someone else's experience, to somebody else's ideas. If somebody tells me that misogyny and sexism are a problem, I might be tempted to reply, well, but in my experience. And yes, in my experience, absolutely, that is true. I have never experienced sexism, but that doesn't make the other piece of information I am being presented with any less true. The soldier mindset tends to push us towards empiricism run amok. Our own experiences are privileged above anyone else's. And we reinforce a sense of separation among people. In the soldier mindset, I put myself at the center of everything, at the center of the universe. My ego is in the middle of it all. My experience is all I can know for sure. And so it sits at the center. But as we discussed last month, what's really at the center is the great heart of everything. That spirit of life and love that connects us all. And the great heart at the center of everything is waiting for us to remember that we are connected and that we belong to one another. And here in our community, we want to believe that, and we want to see it to the fullest extent we can as a truth. So we climb higher and higher to get a better vantage point of the world around us, to see more and more people, to see more and more of those experiences. The problem when you climb to a great height, though, is you tend to mistake the summit for the center. Because you've got such a higher vantage point. You've worked so hard to get there. You've become enlightened about things. And you can't understand anybody who hasn't come up to the top of the mountain with you. And so even we well-meaning religious liberals who are trying to see all the vast connections and understand all our vast connections with life around us, our ego still gets in the way. We still build a barrier in our own minds against the experiences of others. We still put ourselves at the center, and they who are unenlightened, they just don't get it. And we're stumbling away from the great heart at the center of everything. We forget that even when we have climbed up to the top of a mountain, our feet are still firmly planted on the ground. And it is that grounding and that ability to feel it that is the essential practice of our faith life together. In this grounding, we find a sense of humility. Humility connected to the Latin humus for the earth, literally ground. We are called to get grounded, not just in the sense that we are stuck here with our feet on the ground, that we are bound by gravity to this earth, but that we are connected by the ground. A couple of weeks ago, in the Christian tradition, the season of Lent kicked off with the feast of Ash Wednesday. At Ash Wednesday services around the world, Christians have the burnt ashes of the palms from Palm Sunday placed upon their forehead, and the priest or the minister reminds them, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Remember that you are earth, and to earth you shall return. It was a very meaningful holiday for me in my Catholic upbringing, and I'm still tempted from time to time to go out and get the ashes on my forehead on an Ash Wednesday, because that reminder is so essential. Not just to carry over from my teenage years when I was really into the idea of death and it was just so dark and brooding to hear, you're dust and you're going back to dust. No, that you're being reminded of where you came from. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. Believe it or not, that is a very Unitarian, Universalist statement of faith. What? My colleague, the Reverend Galen Gingrich, defines our religious movement in this way. Unitarianism, we come from the same source. Universalism, we all share the same destiny. It is a much less morbid way of saying you are dust and you shall return to dust, but it's the same thing. We are all connected by the earth that we come from, and we are connected by the earth that we are returning to. None of us is separated from that reality. None of us. And so to seek humility is to seek that sense of grounding again, not just the gravity holding our feet to it, but the grounding that connects us to the elements from which we all come. We come from the same source. We share the same destiny. We are from dust and return to dust. We need to remember who we are, where we've come from, and understand who we are in the fullness of who we are. Not just in our brilliant, creative, resourceful minds, not just in everything that we rightly should feel proud about in our being, but also in our mortality and our imperfections and our incompleteness. For we are none of us complete in and of ourselves alone. No single one of ourselves can stand at the center of all that is. No single one of us can afford to be self-centered. Our egos are getting in the way of that reality. And the practice of humility gives us a chance to break down that one barrier that holds us from truly seeing all our connections. It opens us up to a sense of completion in this world, to the full sense of connection to others that breaks down that illusion of separateness that causes so much harm and hurt in the world. If love is the heart of our faith, then humility has to be the practice that takes us there. So, how do we get there? How do we practice humility? I have found of late that the answer is comedy. Go with me here. Some of you who've known me for a long time know I've preached before about the model of improvisation as a way of being in the world. Improvisation is a spiritual practice of staying connected to others. And in the years since I preached that message. That's turned into some workshops that I've led. I've done some time with youth groups here in our district, just playing improvisation games and talking about the rules of improvisation as a model for just being in the world. The last time I did this was just this past summer with our coming of age class, and I realized at the end of that workshop that it had been a long time since I'd actually practiced what I was preaching. I was really out of touch with my own group work. It had been 20-something years. So I went back to school this year. I went back to class for improvisation because I knew the rules up here, but making them work in here is a whole different prospect. Here are the rules of improvisation, just as a refresher. Rule number 1, you are not the most important person in the room. Right there, if you're going to practice humility, this should be the first and foremost thing in your mind. I'm not here in this room and in this work to have it be all about me. Rather, the most important thing that's happening right now is the truth and the scene that we in the group are all discovering together at the same time, as an amalgamation of all of our truths. And because everybody's bringing something into the room, you cannot deny what someone brings into the scene. If someone says to me, "Hey, John, why is that penguin on your head?" my response should not be, "That's not a penguin, my name's not John, and who are you?" There's just nothing, the scene is done. I have to accept what someone has brought to me and add on to that. It's the rule of yes and that you may have heard about improvisational comedy. Yes and. I accept what you've just brought to me in the scene, and we're going to build on that. And finally, and this may seem counterintuitive, but it is very, very important, and it is the rule I have the hardest time with, do not intentionally try to be funny. Yeah. Comedy is about the truth. Improvisation is about the truth. If you're trying to be funny, if you're trying to just put a punchline on the end of a scene, it is all about your ego and trying to get that laugh for a minute. And yeah, it's funny for 10 seconds, but then the scene is all over. Comedy in the improvisational world is all about making the connections between one another's gifts, the gifts that people are bringing into the room. Charna Halpern and Del Close are the godparents of modern improvisation and literally wrote the book on it, and it is called Truth and Comedy. And what they tell us is that making a connection when you're building a scene together generates energy. And as connections are discovered, they perpetuate themselves. If you are paying attention to what others are bringing into the room, the scene keeps going, the connections keep happening. You build truth upon truth upon truth. Our instructor does not call this a spiritual practice, though he does liken it to a sort of Zen meditation, something you have to engage in constantly. And the more you do it, the more you retrain your mind to be in the world in that way, to be open to what is being brought into the room, to say yes to the truths that people are bringing to you, to add your own to it, to build something together. Because improvisation requires us to pay attention to one another. Not just to listen to what they're saying so we can devise what our next response is going to be to defend whatever our great idea was, whatever that punchline we thought we were going to get out was, but to really pay attention to what other people are bringing into the room, what truths they are trying to tell us, what experiences they are trying to share with us. Because everyone is bringing a gift into the scene. Everyone is trying to give us a gift in the scene, whether we're aware of it or not. Everyone has something to share into the scene that we are building together. And because it is a gift, it must be accepted. Yes, and it must be accepted. I cannot let my idea override the truth that is being brought into the room. I cannot let my desire to just put the punchline on the end of the story override what is happening. in the room, what is happening in the scene. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's hard work. Thankfully, in class, the stakes are really, really low, because if we screw up, the only thing that gets ruined is a scene together, which is good, because I need the practice. I break these rules constantly. If you read my column in this month's Voice, you know my new self-affirming mantra is, I made a mistake and it was awesome. Because in the classroom, I get a chance to learn from it without really, destroying anybody's life. But I break these rules constantly. I do not know how to not break the rule of trying to be funny. I always want to put the punchline on the end of the scene. And some days I can hold back, and some days I can't help myself. And yeah, I get a laugh, and yeah, it's funny for 10 seconds, and you know what happens? Then the scene is done. I have ended our work together. And sometimes I'm just not paying attention to the gifts that are being brought into the room. I'm not paying attention to what someone has initiated in that scene. And I'll do something that does absolutely not connect to what has just been brought in the room. One of the women in the class may introduce herself in the scene as a 5-year-old boy, and I don't hear boy, and I come in, I refer to her as she for the rest of the scene, and every week I've been doing this lately, just completely misgender the character in the scene. And then we're off to the races trying to explain that mistake that I just made. I screw up constantly. But every week, my mind shifts a bit more and a bit more and a bit more about how I am in the room with people, not just in class on a Wednesday night, but in counseling with people in my office, in the meetings I go to, in my interactions at a grocery store, in my interactions at home. I'm focusing more and more on what others are bringing in. And when we do it right, when we get it right, there is no feeling quite like it. When the group is in sync together and we manage to keep a scene going and all those connections are being made and energizing us and perpetuating themselves, and we can keep something going for 20 minutes at a time, all of a sudden you experience what the practice of humility can do for you, which is to realize that you can decenter your own ego without devaluing yourself. To know that I am valuable in this group and still experience us as connected, and not feel threatened by the connections. The work of improvisation and the work of humility is to teach oneself to receive from others, to hold back your own ego just a little bit. Give just a little bit less of yourself, or at least a little bit less of your own ideas and opinions, so that you have a chance to receive what others are giving you. And I know the old saw said, is it better to give than receive? And that is fine for Christmas and your birthdays, but any other time, be ready to receive what others are giving you. Because the people around you are trying to share the wholeness of themselves with you, to complete a bigger picture, to complete that sense of belonging to one another. They are trying to give you their wholeness, their skills, their deficiencies, their joy, their pain, their truth. And their truth makes nothing less of your own truth. It just adds to it, yes. It gives us a deeper understanding of who we are in our connections. Julia Galef calls this, in opposition to the soldier mentality, the scout mentality. Rather than soldier trying to defend an idea, the person who climbs up into the trees to get a bigger picture of what is going on around them, to gain a deeper understanding of the environment we are all living in together. To deepen our understanding of one another. It is hard work. It requires practice. But it's necessary, because when we idolize our own mind, our own soul quite so much, it closes us off from the awareness of those connections. But if we can open up, if we can hear the truth of another, if we can value another as much as, if not more than our own self, we create something new. If we can go to Walden and find out that what's not needed is a bag with a sandwich, but a community working together for a garden or a grocery store, we shift something. My friend Nate Hollister talks about it this way. He says, the old saw says, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And he says that sounds really good, but it also ignores the question of whether or not fish is actually a part of the solution that's needed in this case. What we really should be doing is getting out into the neighborhood and asking the man if fish is what they need. And if it is in this case, then make an appointment to go fishing together. And if not, meet the need some other way. Humility reawakens us to our relationships. It reestablishes relationships that maybe we thought were long broken. And it is vital that we practice this. Because outside of the improvisation classroom, the stakes are a lot higher. In the classroom, when a scene goes off the rails and things are just not going well, we all just stop what we're doing and scream, "And die!" Comedy has a lot of death metaphors attached to it. But outside, in the real world, if we can't practice humility, if we can't see those connections, if we are valuing our own selves over and above others, death is a reality. Giving into our own egos is a destructive force. And humility is the one thing that shields us from that destruction. The great heart at the center of everything wants us to remember that we belong to each other, that we are connected to each other. And if this is the objective of our religious life together, then the practice has to be humility. A decentering of ourselves and our egos, a reconnecting with others, or a new seeing of those connections, a receiving of the gifts we all have to share with one another. And finally, a remembering of who we are together. May it be so.